I'm Chris Luzniak,
And I'm Rob Byer,
and this is the Debate Math Podcast,
the show where we redefine what it means to debate in mathematics and education.
where multiple sides of ideas are explored, evidence matters, and we all grow and learn from hearing each other.
Because the world and our classrooms are not binary.
So let's dig into this month's debate.
Every spring, something shifts in classrooms. Schedules tighten, review packets and practice tests appear, and for weeks, sometimes months, instruction bends toward one thing, the state test.
These exams carry enormous weight. They influence school ratings, district decisions, curriculum, teacher evaluations, and often whether students feel successful or not. They're designed to measure learning, to provide accountability, to ensure that standards are met.
But is that what we're really getting from these tests? Is the way we assess learning narrowing instruction, distorting priorities, and sending the wrong message about what it means to truly understand mathematics?
Today's hot seat guests are making a bold argument that what we are currently doing isn't what's best, that we can do better. They are here to argue the resolution. It's time to overhaul assessments.
Our first guest today has been involved in education for the past 30 years. His first job out of college was working in a preschool with 4-year-olds. He then taught English and earth science to elementary students in Kazakhstan while serving as a Peace Corps volunteer. He's facilitated educational exchange programs for the U.S. State Department. He then became a classroom teacher where he taught math and science to middle schoolers for a decade. He's the author of the Middle School Library of Performance Tasks for Problem Solving for the 21st Century. He's the co-founder of the company Tristan, Teacher Resource in School to Assess Anything, which is designed to allow students to return to pencil and paper in their math classrooms while allowing teachers to leverage the power of technology to help assess student work. It is Jay Meadows. Hello, Jay. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, guys. Thanks so much for having me. Really an honor to be here.
Oh, glad to have you here. And can you tell our listeners where you are and what your current role is?
So I am currently in snowy Underhill, Vermont, and we have a couple feet of snow on the ground. Not quite like the East Coast does, but and I am currently the CEO of a company called Exemplars, and my friend Chris Rydell and I have now founded another company called Tristan. So it's, as you described it, we're really trying to leverage technology, but also honor some of the best practices of putting kids in opportunities to turn and talk and use pencil and paper to show their thinking. And so we're trying to leverage some of the better pedagogy strategies we're familiar with all in one big package. So that's what we're working on.
Awesome. And then the question we ask all of our guests, when did math first become controversial to you?
Yeah, interesting question. I'd say it was right at the beginning of my teaching career. I was a dual teacher. I taught math and science. And my students in my science class, I noticed, were really engaged. They were having a good time. And I did a lot of inquiry activities. And it was very hands-on. And there was a lot of conversations. The kids would run in there and be like, what are we doing today? My math classroom was kind of the opposite. The kids seemed kind of bored and their heads were kind of down and they weren't super engaged. And I started wondering, like, I wonder if I could turn my math classroom into more of this inquiry-based environment like my science classroom. And I found a book from John Vanderwall, Student-Centered Learning, became sort of my foundation of how I taught math for many, many years. And it's really kind of an inquiry-based lesson. You ask kids something kind of at the edge of their zone of proximal development, kind of let them work on it, talk about it, figure it out, and then we would share out strategies and get more and more efficient. And the classroom just kind of popped. Like the kids were engaged, they were really having a good time. So now, 20 years later, I go to sessions at some of the conferences about the debate between inquiry-based math and direct instruction. And it's kind of fascinating now to sort of see okay, yeah, I've been on both sides of those, and I definitely come down on the sides of inquiry-based. I think it's very engaging for kids. I've seen it be highly successful for kids. There are moments of direct instruction that are necessary, but for me, it's all about finding that balance. So that's one of my kind of big controversies I've been thinking about.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And arguing and working alongside Jay is a retired principal research analyst at AIR, American Institutes for Research. An educator who has a 50-year career of leadership positions in math education, including teacher, presenter, consultant, mentor, coach, evaluator, researcher, podcast contributor, critical friend, and change agent. He's a former high school math teacher and then spent 22 years as a math consultant with the Connecticut Department of Education. He's also served on the NCTM Board of Directors and has been president of NCSM and is an active member of the Association of State Supervisors of Mathematics. He was the awardee of the 2015 NCSM Glenn Gilbert Ross Taylor National Leadership Award for outstanding contributions to math education and has been awarded the 2021 the NCTM Lifetime Achievement Award. He's an author of several professional books, mathematics textbooks, and has written numerous articles. Most recently, he and his 17-year-old granddaughter, Caroline, co-wrote the Math Tutor's Handbook, Strategies and Tips for Success that was published by Corwin in 2024. It's Steve Limewand. Steve, welcome back.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hey, can you remind our listeners where you are and what your current role is?
So I'm currently sitting halfway between the White House and the Capitol. We spend about 2 weeks a month here in Washington, D.C. It's crazy land. Today is something like the State of the Union address, which means that Pennsylvania Avenue will be shut down for part of the evening. And, you know, it's just part of life here. We will go north rather than south today to avoid all that stuff. I am semi-retired. I'm still writing. I'm still playing. I'm still mentoring. I still do lots of reading. I am concerned most these days about high school and about assessment. And so that's what keeps me alive and busy.
And then the question that we ask everybody, when did math first become controversial to you?
So math came easy to me almost all along. I was on the math team in high school, and I wiped through all of the assessments with 800s and 5s on the AP test, and I'm a math major at Wesleyan. And freshman year, I am taking Calc 3, Honors Calc 3, which is perfect for all the little nerdy kids. And the divide, the wall, when we got to Stokes' theorem in multivariate calculus, and I was lost. I mean, there was no way that my brain was able to process that. And so I had the experience at 19 that people have at 5, at 9, at 10, and in high school when they hit the wall. And it's really helped informed my whole professional career, because that wall is something that almost everyone hits. I hit it, at that particular point, and I was really lucky. I got to move on to tutorials in game theory and in probability and statistics my sophomore year, and ended up having just enough math to eventually get certified when I decided that economics was a fine major, but that I really wanted to try teaching and be an educator, and the rest is history.
Well, welcome back, Steve. Thank you.
All right, and with that, let's get into the debate. And we begin with opening statements from our speakers.
I believe Steve's going to go first. Steve, the floor is yours.
So test scores are down. Absenteeism is up. Surveys suggest that students are bored and teachers are frustrated. And while the world is changing at an unimaginable pace, schools are stuck in tradition, in political correctness, a lack of bold leadership, and completely out of step with what the workplace and societal responsibilities require today. There is a serious problem with K-12 schooling, and most people recognize it. I think this problem is most applicable to K-12 mathematics, where Google can, forget AI for a second, where Google can score proficient on nearly any high-stakes state assessment. And our students know it. We call it cheating. They call it using available tools and being smart. So this issue of things aren't so good. Some blame the pandemic, others blame computers and the internet. The explanation of the day is cell phones and social media rotting brains and any chance of having a positive self-concept. And then add the brand new challenges of AI and what we mean by cheating and what's important to know. They're all likely suspects, but not easy to address without sledgehammer policies like banning things that everyone knows shouldn't be banned if schools are going to prepare kids for the real world. And in my humble opinion, they all missed the mark. My take, hanging out in a wide range of schools, is that the primary culprit is mind numbing, cover too much, multiple choice, standardized tests that are strangling the life out of teaching and learning, and that ignore the critical questions that schools should be addressing every single day on every single test. Questions like, why? Why is that? Can you explain your reasoning? Can you justify your thinking? How can this be solved in a different way? How might you picture that solution? Questions we don't currently find on most assessments, but questions that are essential for what the workplace is asking of its employees, and schools need to find better ways of preparing students. I mean, how dysfunctional are things? Consider factoring of trinomials is still taught 2 wasted weeks only because it's on the tests. Most of the essential math in life is data-driven and statistical, but you wouldn't know that from an item analysis of most of the tests. And when students are behind, instead of going deeper and catching them up, we race through the content with the excuse that it's on the test and compromise their learning. Let the discussion of the critical need for an overhaul of high-stakes standardized testing begin.
And Jay, the floor is
Awesome.
yours.
I had a whole thing planned, and listening to Stevie so articulate, it's kind of like, how do I kind of back that up? I think we are in a really fascinating time in education. This idea of artificial intelligence has just sort of fallen upon us, and now a lot of educators, it's our responsibility to kind of like, okay, what are we going to do with this? To me, I'm sort of looking at it through a different lens. I agree with Steve entirely that our assessments, the way they're designed right now, they were designed and built for a very specific objective, which was to assess 30 million kids in the span of about a month and get a sense of how schools and districts were doing with taxpayer money, right? It's an accountability system, the current system we have. And so in 2001, when No Child Left Behind sort of mandated this assessment requirement, we raced to sort of, okay, how are we going to assess all of these kids? So we built a system using the very best technology and some of the smartest minds in assessments and education that we had. And the tool that we could use was some sort of multiple choice question, right? We could see if it was right or wrong. We could put it on a Scantron and we could see how kids were doing. In 2000 and around 14, almost all states had moved to an electronic computer-based assessment system. But the questions remained very similar, right? We needed to assess all of these students. We needed to do it quickly. We needed to turn around the results, which still takes like 6 months. And so we were continuing to try to do our best. All of a sudden, though, we have this tool, this artificial intelligence. And I started playing with it about a year and a half ago, just kind of seeing like, what's the possibility of AI looking at student handwritten work and determining if the student was right or wrong? And it can do it quite well, actually. Then I started putting in things like solutions to performance tasks and putting in rubrics and kind of seeing, okay, AI, what would you think of this student work compared to the rubric? And it gave me a really detailed, thoughtful analysis of the work. And it sparked sort of this curiosity for me of like, could we change our assessments entirely? So that's kind of where Steve and I have been working for about a year now is really like what might an assessment look like where not only are students asked to sort of give the right answer, but show their thinking, show their calculations, solve it multiple different ways. Yeah, we've been exploring that and we're finding that it's really possible. So for me now, part of what I'm really passionate about is like kind of announcing this to the math community that a different assessment is possible, that the technology is right at our fingertips. So let's embrace this new technology and really figure it out. It's going to take time. I went to the National Council for Student Assessments conference last year in Denver. And in one of the sessions, I was learning that it takes 3 years from the time they design a question to when it actually shows up on assessments, on a state assessment, because it has to go through so many tests and so many iterations and committees. Imagine now trying to change the entire assessment system. How long is that going to take? And so one of my beliefs is like, I want to announce that it's possible. I want to show that it's possible. I've done a couple webinars where I've shown what it could look like, so that the community starts sort of talking to their state leaders and be like, hey, we can do better now. So let's lean into better. So that's kind of where I am and where Steve and I are kind of collaborating.
Okay, thank you both.
Allow me to provide a bookend.
Sure, go ahead.
What is so important in this discussion is that we both believe in assessment. We both believe in data and reporting. We both believe in accountability. This is not anti-assessment. What we don't believe in is overwhelmingly multiple choice test items that have so much power. What we don't believe in is a primary focus on recall and memorization as the way that we confer privilege, the way we confer smarts. And so given that, what we're both saying is we simply seek, given newly available technology and changing societal needs, better assessments.
Okay, yeah. So again, you've given us tons to think about already, and I like this. I guess my first question, I just want to see, can you paint us a little bit more in a detailed picture of what your like ideal assessment looks like? Like, is there some multiple choice, some recall, or is it just all open-ended? Like what, I know it's like 3 years, 5 years away before we would see this as teachers, but can you give us a little bit more detail what you're kind of imagining on these assessments?
So I'll start very directly with my long-term experiences writing test items and overseeing math assessment in Connecticut for some 20 years and working on assessments in about a dozen states while I was at AIR. And it is estimation. We all know that estimation is critical. We know that the Common Core state standards don't do a great deal of focusing on estimation, but estimation is number sense. Estimation is something that you can't Google in the same way. I mean, you can get exact answers, but often we don't need exact answers. We need to estimate. But I have tried for 30 years to write good multiple choice assessment items, and it can't be done. You just can't write a decent item. Everyone just says, well, I mean, is it this one or is it this one? How do you have, distractors that make any sense? What does he mean by an estimate? The only way that we can really effectively assess something as important as estimation is with open-ended items, where the kids both provide an estimate and justify the estimate. And we haven't had the tools to do that. We haven't put those kinds of things on our assessments. So when we talk about the kinds of critical skills to speak about understanding, the critical things about number sense, data sense, symbol sense, it is an answer to a problem or a situation, and it is an explanation. And that means that instead of having 65 items, we could probably do 20 items and get an incredibly accurate measure of what's going on. And if we can have kids write it out and instantly transfer what they write out via a scan or a photo, and then score it effectively on a 4-3-2-1 scale. I mean, we've been using 4-point and 6-point rubrics. I never liked the 6-point rubric for writing for 50 years. And it's been really wonderful. Now, it's also been incredibly expensive, and so we've seen it drop off. And yet writing seems to me more important than ever to assess because of the availability of AI. I want to see what kids can write without the technology, and I want to keep that alive and well. But at the same time, I want to give kids opportunity to get AI feedback on their writing, and then use that feedback to improve what they do. So I just think that this combination of thinking and reasoning, of the conceptual understanding more than just the skills, and the technology all come together and help us frame the kinds of assessments that are better. I want kids to be answering why. How do you know? When I look at the Desmos middle school and high school curriculum, for example, put out by Amplify, you notice how many of the pages of the tasks have, and now explain it, show how you got it. And, teachers are able to see all those things. Well, why don't we have that on our tests? We know that kind of thinking and reasoning and justification, when we can say to kids, show me in two different ways. And we can measure that, and we don't need a human, and we can still get the scoring back within a week. That to me is the holy grail.
I see two significant changes to state assessments that I think would be really powerful. The first one is, let's take a typical question that's on a state exam now. One I've memorized is, you've got 24 apples, you've got four baskets, and I'm supposed to put an equal number of apples in the baskets. Third grade question. And you're given a little box and you're supposed to put a number in it, right, to answer the question. So let's say the student conceptually recognizes, oh, this is a division problem, and they know how to set it up, but they put the wrong number in there. We don't know if, let's say the answer is supposed to be 6, but if the kid puts 5 in there, we don't know why the student made that mistake. We have to infer a lot. So in a new system, a new AI enhanced system, what if there was a writing space right there on the screen where you could take a stylus and an iPad, or even a pencil and paper, and the student was responsible for showing their mathematical calculations, right? And that could be part of the assessment. But because we know that students who solve the same problem multiple ways are really great mathematicians, this is from John Hattie's work. What if the expectation was, okay, solve it one way, can you think of another way to solve it? And so students are sort of left with this expectation. You could solve it multiple ways. What if representations became an expectations? And so the student tried to create a diagram, with baskets and draw it out, or use a number line to show it. The opportunity for this writing space on a state exam, in addition to the answer, just opens up a lot of information about the student. We don't have to infer. We can see actually what's going on in the student. Maybe the kid puts 96 in the problem. Again, we can kind of guess. Looks like they multiplied the 24 times 4. But if they could show their work, we're like, yep, see, we can see where their misconception was. So a writing space, and the AI, you put a question like that, and I've actually done it. You take that question, you put the student work in, you put it into an AI trained system, and it'll be like, oh, yeah, this student is thinking additively instead of multiplicatively, or right, the calculations was set up correctly, but they used the wrong multiplication factors, right? It can diagnose that, and then you start using AI to see patterns. That's one of the things AI is so powerful with, is it can see patterns. It can see a student pattern, but it can see a class pattern of misconceptions. It can see a grade level patterns. It can see school level patterns, and it can tell us that like instantly. So there's just a lot of opportunities with sort of a writing system. The second big change for me is a lot of assessments now use constructed response questions, and they're kind of multiple step, and the expectations is supposed to be a real world scenario, and the kids are going to use different math tools and solve multiple steps. But the constructed response are putting third graders who are 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old onto a laptop to try to show their mathematical thinking for these really challenging questions. And it's really difficult for students to do that. And so what ends up happening is teachers are wanting their students to do well, and schools want their students to do well. So they're spending time practicing these skills. They're putting kids to practice writing those constructed response questions or the multiple choice questions, where if you created an environment where, again, the student could use pencil and paper and write out all of their thinking and show it just like they do in a normal classroom, and you could take a picture of it, and AI could score the handwriting, which I've proven is very possible. Or you create a iPad environment where the student would write it right there on the iPad and could instantly sort of upload their answer. Or if they wanted to use manipulatives, hands-on manipulatives to show their thinking, the kid could take a picture of it and include it in their solution. There's just so many opportunities to rethink what we want our kids to do based on sort of this new technology that's available. And one of the driving forces for me is when we look at the goals of education in the 21st century, right? There's really two sides of a coin. There's the content standards, the algorithms and formulas and procedures that we want students to learn. But there's this other side of the coin, which are in some instances called the mathematical practices. In some states, they call them the process standards. NCTM calls it the process standards. And they really constitute problem solving, reasoning and proof, communication, connections, and representations. These are equally important in terms of mathematical understanding as the formulas and algorithms. So when we create an environment where students are sort of asked to create a representation, to visualize the mathematical thinking, for me, extrapolate that into what the teachers now think is important for their students. The teacher is going to think, my students expected to make a representation for a fourth grade standard. Boy, I need to lean into those representations. They need to know how to use a number line. They need to know how to use a table, build a table, put column headings in the tables and set them up correctly. Like that becomes an expectation in the classroom because that's an expectation on the assessments. And I've really grown to believe that our assessments are driving our instruction in this country. And so if we define better expectations and we can design better assessments, I think that's going to do some really amazing things for our students to get them engaged. So yeah, there's a lot of powerful leverage in sort of rethinking our assessments that I'm excited about.
Let me just pick up on this idea of standards, if you'd let me for a second, Chris. I mean, so one of the strongest pushbacks that we get on all of this is, what are you guys complaining about? The tests simply honor the standards. The tests can't come out unless they are aligned with the standards. And so what are you talking about? And the first critical thing is every single state has either NCTM-esque or Common Core-esque process standards like Jay is just talking about. And you know that we don't really assess them. We don't do real problem solving. We don't do representations. We do not do communication. Those things are just not on the test because you can't do them with multiple choice in any clear way. And so we're talking about recognizing we've always picked and chosen the standards that we can assess. And now we just have to stop and realize that the process standards have to take a front and center role if we're truly going to honor what society is saying schools need to do, schools need to provide. We're not throwing out tons of stuff. We're simply saying that our assessments have to drive the kind of instruction that Jay just talked about, where we truly honor, because it's on the test, these process standards that we've been playing with since basically 1989.
Let me say, like, as a teacher, I love this idea, right? Students have to explain their thinking. You're talking, Jay, about manipulatives and different models and things like that. That all sounds great. But you both keep talking about using AI to assess it because, like, we want some quick data, some quick turnaround time. But what about those of us who don't really trust AI? Like, AI makes mistakes. It's still not great, and maybe it never will be great. Like, are we just putting our eggs in one basket and hoping it'll be a good tool?
So let me save Jay, the opportunity to tout some amazing work. And most people know that I'm pretty damn critical. I mean, I have a real bug right now about ed reports and the way in which the range of quality in the programs that it anoints. And I'm a bigger cynic than you are, Chris. And so the point is that I'm like Missouri. Show me. I watched as Jay took 2 pages of handwritten student work on a really nice constructed response problem, just like what we were producing for Smarter Balance and Park before those things basically blew up. In other words, we had the Common Core. We said, how do we assess it? This is in 2014, 2015, 2016. We had some states join those consortia, and we had the kind of problems that you would really want kids to wrestle with. They were like the AP Part 2 items. In other words, the gold standard, the AP stuff, was asking constructed response problems, and we were not doing that in K-10 in any real way. So I see the student work, and Jay scans the 2 pages into a computer with this Tristan software. He has a 5-characteristic communication, the mathematical precision, and a 4-point rubric, just like we have for reading language arts, just like is the model rubrics for open-ended and constructed response items. And this software produced highly reliable scores, 1, 2, 3, or 4, for each of the 5 categories, and it blew my mind. In other words, we're close. We're real close. And there's lots of work being done with this. The testing firms understand this. I don't think their stuff is yet as strong as what Jay has, and we'll have to worry about that. But it is clearly doable, and no teacher should do anything other than what you just did. No administrator should do anything other than what you just did until they are shown it being done by a kid with kids' work, and they're able to say, "Oh my goodness." Jay.
Jay, I'm still a little skeptical. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. So I started really as just kind of like, I wonder, right? I was just kind of had a couple extra hours at work, so I just started playing. And I was blown away. This was about 18 months ago. Blown away by how well AI could read handwriting and dissect what the student had done and score it, assess it, and give feedback to the student. I was just like, wow, look at that. Because I've been working in performance assessments for about 20 years and really learning as much as I can, some of the programming that we do in Tristan is it brings a lot of years of research to it. So it is even sometimes I put pieces of work in there. I'm like, wow, look at that. Like, holy cow, it really figured it out. And the handwriting would be sideways and the kid work would be a little bit scratchy, and it still would figure it out. And it can pull out, like, here's the calculation that they did, and here's the title of the representation that they used, but the numbers were off. And it's amazing how well it reads. Steve is right, though. We still have a ways to go. I couldn't say it to a state, yep, today we're ready to go. But the possibility is right there. I think, to go back to your original question, Chris, about AI in the classroom, I hold a belief that one of the best things we can do in our math classrooms is close the laptops and turn and talk with each other. I'm a passionate believer in the power of pencil and paper. I love cognitive neuroscience, and one of the images I saw that just kind of shapes a lot of my thinking was watching students work individually with the sort of the fMRI hats on, and when the kid's working alone, you see little pinpricks of activity. But when you have students working on a very similar problem, but in groups with these fMRI hats on, the whole brains are lighting up. It's much more active sort of activity in the brain. And then you see the difference between handwriting, when the kids have to sort of construct their thinking and use their pens and the motor cortex is engaged, versus typing it. Again, the typing just has small pinpricks of activity, where the writing activity seems to really pull together a lot more of the regions of the brain. I love it when kids turn and talk and use pencil, paper, and problem solve together, get out the manipulatives and figure things out. I'm also a realist that there's a value to technology in the classroom, to teachers. And so one of my real thoughts is, how do we leverage the power of technology for the benefit of the teachers while maintaining some really powerful practices in our classroom, some good pedagogy of getting kids to turn and talk? So how do you kind of combine the best of both of those? That's the recipe I'm trying to figure out. And I can tell you, I don't have it figured out right now. There are things that are still kind of like, well, what do we do with that? So we're still iterating, but yeah, that's the goal. I really want to use best practice for all of it if we can. How much of it can we pull together in one place?
So you guys both mentioned about the process standards, and we know that like in Spain, for instance, that the process standards, they made a massive shift, 7 or 8 years ago, and they're trying to assess, and it's taken some time to be able to do it correctly. But I guess, with that, as we're talking about process standards, like, and you want to totally overhaul, the assessment system, are we going to keep word problems that are closer to like reading comprehension rather than like mathematical understanding? Like, they're very lengthy, they're, a lot of words, a lot, are we keeping those, or are we going to shift how like those are developed as well?
So I think that one of the things we do is we have multi-step problems. I think that the idea of 40 or 60 separate items is crazy. That in fact, we ought to simply talk about, in fourth grade, that there are 16 boxes, and each of those boxes has 12 cups. And the question is, how many cups are there? So the point is that, sure, I have simple, straightforward word problems, but rather than just, worry about the answer of 190, whatever it is, 192, I'm going to say, what operations did you use? I'm going to say, why did you use that operation? I'm going to ask, why did you multiply? Could you have used a different operation? Those are the kinds of questions that are about thinking and reasoning that get at this notion of operation sense. And so I think you're absolutely right that is part of it. And then I might push it a step further and say, yeah, but when you're opening the boxes, you end up dropping and breaking 4 of them. How many are left? Any number of things that can be done with that. But I think you're asking the right question. I just want to go back to one other thing. I just think your viewers, your listeners, if you are appropriately skeptical, if you're not sure about this AI, because no one's sure about this AI, let me just ask you to Google snorkel. SNORKL. I guess it's snorkel.app if you don't want to Google it and you just want to enter it. That's all I'm going to say. You go look at what happens when you put student work in and you see the work that 2 crazy guys have done. It is mind-boggling. And so we need to recognize that, we're 2 years into this. In another 2 years, it's growing exponentially, and we will have more powerful tools, and we'll have all kinds of smart people, very smart people, pushing it further. And we just we need to keep our eye on the ball, which is the tool helps. But we start now with thinking about how to change it. Remember, we have to pilot all this stuff. No one can do an item, today that doesn't, get kids' eyes for another 2 years. So there's really a good deal of lead time.
I don't want to say that we need to throw out the old tests and create something brand new. In my mind, it's more adding a layer of technology that's now existing, where this idea of students showing their work, I think there's a time and place for multiple choice questions. I do. I think they are an interesting tool for us. But if you add this layer of students showing their thinking, of being given permission to solve it multiple different ways and using representations as part of their thinking, I think that really drives the mindsets of teachers, of the expectations. Like, oh yeah, this is going to be tested. Let's lean into this. It's not so much what we did in the past isn't good. We were accomplishing the goal, the mandate, which was assess these students, 30 million of them. But I'm excited for what the classrooms will look like. And in my mind, I'm sort of thinking of 2030 as the goal. That for me is the goal. If we could have assessments that invite students to show their thinking by 2030, like that would be an amazing accomplishment, right? And then I think of the classrooms where students are showing their thinking and working on iPads and doing a lot of work. Part of my aha started about 2 years ago. My son is studying electrical engineering, and he does all of his mathematical calculations on an iPad. And it was just amazing to watch him work and do all of the math and grow the screen and write things and shrink it back down. And I asked him if the other students in his engineering program were using the iPad the same way. He's like, a couple are, but he was showing all of his buddies what he was doing. And so within a year, the next summer, I was like, are your buddies using iPads now? They're like, yeah, everyone's using iPads now. And it's like, once you kind of realize the power of this thing to do math and I just have this vision of, 5-10 years from now, like a lot of stuff being done on iPads. At the same time, I struggle with technology in the classroom. So, right, I don't quite know what the answers look like and what the best practices are, but it's a very exciting future for me in education. I'm really excited about the possibilities of where we can go.
Well, and if we're going to change this too, so we're talking about possibly changing to assess more for the process standards. We're talking about having multi-layered questions, shrinking the test, and making it more dimensional. Should we also revamp or overhaul, like having a one-off assessment that drives all state, local, federal decisions and financial implications? Like, should we overhaul that as well?
Absolutely. So I that's the right question, Rob. I think that we know if we step back that we have overplayed the accountability. That we now use these tests to do everything. We have tests that assess the kids, that assess the schools, that assess teachers and whether they should be rehired, that assess administrators and whether they should, stay in their role as principal. We've overplayed the impact and the importance of these tests despite their limitations and weaknesses. I think that Teddy Kennedy was one of the most impressive senators that we've ever had in my lifetime. He may have been one of the most effective senators during all of his years. Late in his career, Teddy Kennedy got into bed with George Bush in about 2001 and signed on to No Child Left Behind. Teddy Kennedy bought into this accountability model of Texas's test every single grade, every single year. And we are still living with, for lots and lots of reasons, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and once in high school assessments. It takes so much time, so much money, the amount of time preparing for the test, so looking at the scores, worrying about those scores. So when you talk about does it require other changes, I think that if we had half a brain, every single state would argue about, debate, and then recognize that if we did fourth, sixth, and eighth grade fall testing with high stakes tests early in the year, we would be so much better off. First of all, I don't care about holding individual teachers accountable for understanding that 6 teachers are responsible for. I want to know what kids walk into my 4th grade, 6th grade, or 8th grade class knowing and able to do after a summer off. I'll do some review and some acclimation and all that kind of stuff. But before October 1st, or before, if we start in the end of August, before September 15th, I want to have 4 days of assessment. I want to look at how well kids can read and comprehend and understand, and I want to know what they know about mathematics. I want to have a high quality, as we keep saying, 4th grade, 6th grade, 8th grade test, and that's all I need. That's all I need. I don't have to test every single grade, and I don't have to do it at late in the year when everything is, oh, we have to stop learning. We have to stop all this stuff. We have to prepare for the tests that happens in so many places. The kids who most need more time and better instruction are in the schools where the test performance is weakest and where people resort to IXL and other insipid computer programs and simply rob kids of any sense of dignity. And it certainly has no data that show that it really enhances learning on the things that are important. So I just think that is an indispensable piece. I mean, it's unclear. Some states will say, "Oh no, the law says we have to every year." I'm looking at the law right now, and I'm looking at the world that says there's no more Department of Education. No one's going to come and stick it. I mean, they can't. I mean, the state now has the ability to say, "Screw you. We're going to make our own decisions." You tell us that states are the incubator for innovation, so we're going to use AI. We're going to change this stuff. We're going to serve our kids, and you can come and try and fine us, but you will lose. I mean, that's the issue that's missing. It is the lack of guts, the lack of vision, the sense that it's time to simply say we have created a counterproductive system and we've got to make some changes. So I mean, I think you're asking the right question, and I think that this return to 4th, 6th, and 8th, it's right. It makes sense. 3rd grade, watch a 3rd grader do these ridiculous state tests. I mean, yeah, right. You're nodding your head only because we see it. So we have 4th grade. Okay, we're back, and it's not this thing. Oh, so now we're going to do some assessments. Let's go play. Let's see how we know. Let's see what you guys remember from over the summer. Okay, no one expects everyone to get 100 on this test. Oh, great. Let's go. That to me is, and then I don't talk about the tests all year long. Oh, it's going to be on the test. Oh, we have to do it for this. I will tell you one other story. So I'm working in a district that will go unnamed. It is a troubled district. It is overwhelmingly African American. Their scores are terrible. They are at risk of state takeover. The middle schools have been really problematic, and we've been working very hard to improve the quality of instruction and the coherence of the curriculum in the middle school and in the high school. And so we have an understanding of how critical Algebra 1 is for life. I mean, Algebra 1 is really the gatekeeper more than Algebra 2. Algebra 1 is, if you can't do it, you are going to be screwed in statistics and life and the idea of function and all of those things in so many ways. So I come in and say, hey, we've got all these kids that come into ninth grade. They have been deprived of an understanding of sign numbers. Their proportion and ratio percent skills are still incredibly weak, and we know that's more important than a lot of things. Why the hell don't we just skip polynomials and quadratics in Algebra 1, and then we'll worry about that in Algebra 2 or later? That way we have time, we don't race through it, we can do the backfilling, we can make sense of it. You know where I'm going. Oh, why don't you look at this state's Algebra 1 end of course test? It's 20% quadratics. That is a clear indicator of a disincentive to serve kids. And that happens in different ways all across the country because, well, it's in the standards. Well, we have to go do it. Well, we have to assess everybody. And so, I mean, I still believe that these teachers can gradually, if they believe we're covering in their rear, they will make that change because they understand that if all the rest of it is done well, the kids will all be proficient on the test, even though they never saw polynomials or quadratics. But that's a hard sell until a few people try it, and lo and behold, it works. So we're working on that as a way around it, because the current situation is no one wins. And it's all because of that damn Algebra 1 end of course test.
And Jay, I want to bring you in on this, but I also want to bring in like the cost of, like, you're talking also like training teachers to not just be answer getting or test focused and things like that. Maybe Steve kind of saying like rewrite some standards or some state rules. Like there's a lot of cost. And you set a goal of 2030. That sounds ambitious to like overhaul not just the testing now, but you're changing the way we see education or see math class, and maybe in a good way, but like it's a lot of work. So like, is this all possible?
So there is something at the federal level, which is called the Innovative Assessment Development Authority, IADA. And it is designed specifically to allow states to apply to the federal government for permission to run pilot assessments. And you can do a small group within your state to kind of demonstrate that the assessment you've created has equal sort of reliability to the current state assessments. Interestingly, though, I don't think any states have applied in the last several years for an IADA permission. So the law is right there. And if you just Google Innovative Assessment Development Authority, all of the expectations that you need as a state are right available for you. And Steve and I are actually going to be speaking to the Association of State Supervisors of Mathematics in June about this very topic. It's like, what's the roadmap to try this? So the permission, the design to do this is there. And I forget the state. They have gotten a permission to do 3 assessments through the year, so that instead of being everything's at the end, and there's a special name for it. Somebody help me out if they remember what it is. But it's like, it's as Steve was describing, there's an early in the year assessment, there's a mid-year assessment, and there's the end of the year assessment. And they want to see growth, and they want to demonstrate efficacy of some of the stuff that they're doing in the classroom. So we can invent, we can be creative in our current environment. Does it require new teaching, Chris? I think the answer to me is that the NCTM process standards have been around. I thought it was the 90s. Steve knows better. He says it's 1989. So, I mean, these things have been around for 30, 40 years, these expectations of using representations and models and visualizations of mathematics. Those have been with us for a very long time. But because they haven't been on the assessments, because the expectation of the student not having to create it, more sort of look at it and diagnose it and pull the pieces apart and sort of define an answer to a multiple choice question from it, I don't know how much we lean into building some of these representations. And I would suggest per grade level, there's 5 or 6 representations that are just really foundational. Like if we were to just lean into those number lines in early grades, tables in early grades, bar models and double number lines, and then graphs as the students progress. If we just lean into a few of those really deeply, I think our students' mathematical understandings will expand. And there's something to making sense of these mathematical concepts, right? Because as we learn about mathematical understanding, there's kind of 3 legs of the stool. There's conceptual understanding. What's the big idea of this concept? There's procedural fluency, the algorithms and formulas that we've defined are most efficient to get you to the right answer. And the third leg of the stool is this idea of application, right? Can I look at a real world situation and go, oh, this is a moment for division with fractions. Okay, where's that tool in my toolbox? Oh, wait, I've got another step here. I need a different tool for this step. And I get to decide what are my steps. Those ideas have been around for a very long time. Those understandings have been around, but I keep coming back to because it's not on the assessments, I just don't know how much focus and front of mind they are for teachers to lean into. And so by redefining the expectations on those end of the year assessments, I'm really hoping we refocus our minds on, you know what, I'm going to spend a lot of time with my students visualizing mathematics. And I'll go back to my son who's studying engineering. He was showing me this X, Y, Z graph that he was doing with calculus, and interceptance is like, oh, that, and he's drawing it all out. I was like, oh, Tyler, that's pretty cool, right? So visualizations become incredibly powerful as you progress in mathematics and science and technology and engineering. So in order for that to be sort of second nature to students, we can start in kindergarten. We can really lean in all the way through. And one of the things we know about becoming great at something is this idea of 10,000 hours, right? The more time you spend on something, the better you get at it. And you need a good instructor guiding you on that process. So by starting very, very early with these important mathematical concepts, constantly being reinforced, I really believe that we do our students and our children of this country a benefit by leaning into some of these things that have been around a very long time.
Let me elaborate on this really quickly by stepping back some. In some ways, this educational enterprise is really very simple. We plan, we implement, and we monitor. The whole thing is a 3-legged stool where there is curriculum, our standards and what we should be teaching, our implementation, our classroom, our pedagogy, and our assessment. In an ideal world, it goes in that order. We think about what's important, we justify it, we have our standards, the standards become teachable, they're clear, they're understood, and then we go and implement it, and we focus on what the standards mean, and then how to teach it in different kinds of ways, and we come along with a monitoring device of some sort to assess it, and in that order. Well, there's also this reality that assessment drives reform. I mean, assessment is still the most powerful lever. Certainly, I mean, it's visible and it's urgent and it's more powerful than the teaching and the curriculum. I believe that teaching to the test is an entirely sensible, appropriate behavior when the tests are appropriate, aligned, and strong. I did a whole study in whatever they were, in the early 2000s about Singapore math. And in Singapore math, what we learned is that what made Singapore math so amazing and still makes it so amazing is, number one, all systems are aligned. That is, what is supposed to be taught, how it's taught, and how it's assessed are all of the same. And you compare that to the United States, where it's all over the place, obviously. The alignment. And then what separates Singapore is each of those elements is high quality as well as just aligned. So teaching to a test is not a bad thing, and speaks to this. Finally, this issue of state leadership, this issue of we only need to start in 1 or 2 states. In 1987, I bought 37,000 calculators, one for every 8th grader in the state of Connecticut, and we became the first state to allow kids to use calculators on the 8th grade state test. In 1992, we moved it to 6th grade. We didn't have to buy any more calculators. That is an example of assessment-driven reform. nobody would use a calculator if in fact it wasn't on the test. And if it's on the test, lo and behold, they will use it. But the test only had calculators on about half the test. And so it's like we were talking before, Rob, about this balancing act, that it's not all or nothing. We still had areas where we wanted to know that kids could still add two-digit numbers and multiply two-digit numbers. We never went beyond a two-digit divisor, so we kept it sane, but all the problems were far more realistic, and kids had calculators to do it, where we were able to worry less about the calculation and much more about the operations. And so that would not have happened if we didn't back off and allow kids to use calculators. I think that there's a similar parallel to what we're trying to do now, and sometimes it has to start with the tests.
I think there's a natural human instinct of teachers that they want their students to do well on the tests, right? It's just a natural instinct. I want my students to see growth. I want to be successful on these tests. If that's our natural human instinct, then let's design tests that are worth teaching to, right? If we design a test that's got really great questions and really cool opportunities for students to do high level mathematics, then that's worth leaning into. So I really want to echo what Steve is saying. It's like we can design assessments of high quality. And I think I want to give a real praise to the designers of the current assessments. They had a responsibility of assessing 30 million kids. And they had like 2 years to figure out how to do that. And they've done the very best using the highest level of technology they could. So shout out to what they've created. I think my point is mostly, yeah, but now today we're there's another layer of opportunity for us. So let's embrace it, right? Let's add it to the expectations. Let's add it to the format, and just do better for our students, because we can. The opportunity to do better is right there. So let's embrace it and sort of race to it as fast as we can. And there's research that's going to be required to kind of make sure it's valid and reliable. And but we could do that. We know how to do that. But let's set a course for that, and get there, I think, as quickly as we can.
This is so much fun for me. I mean, this collaboration between an educator change agent and an educator entrepreneur. This is a chance for me to sit back. I mean, Jay and I have written things together. We've done some seminars together and all, and we've sort of found this bond around the possibility of making substantive changes. And I just love listening to the different perspectives and how they mesh so nicely.
Well, it's an honor working with you, Steve. We get to have some really amazing conversations and sharing back and forth with you. And it's an honor for me.
It's been great listening to you both. But I want to wrap up this debate and give you guys a chance to give your final thoughts to the audience.
Hi, listeners. Before we get into final arguments, we want to pause and have you ponder for a moment. What did the guest just say? And what stood out for you?
Whatever is on your mind, we want to hear it.
Did you know you could text us your thoughts?
Just head to the show notes for this episode and look for the text us link. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
And with that, let's hear our closing statements. We will now end by giving Steve and Jay a few minutes to make their final arguments to you. Jay, take it away.
All right. So we are at an amazing moment in history in terms of education. A technology has arrived that can transform everything about education. And I think a lot of soul searching and a lot of analysis is required to really determine the best usage of artificial intelligence in education. I think we have to be very thoughtful and research based on what we're going to do with our kids and what they're going to do with artificial intelligence in the classrooms. So I think the investigation of what do we really need to do is still sort of in front of us. At the same time, using artificial intelligence as a change agent for something as direct as the way we ask kids to demonstrate their mathematical understanding and the types of questions that we can design and the types of expectations we can define has been radically transformed all of a sudden. And if our goal of education is what's best for students, how do we help our students thrive in the world that they're going to inherit? which I'm actually very excited about. We need to be embracing the very best of mathematical pedagogy that we know of, and we can do that. It's right at our fingertips. The technology to change a lot of how we assess our kids and the kinds of expectations we have on those assessments, it's right at our fingertips. And I want to encourage everyone to sort of be talking at the state level, talk to your superintendents, talk to your state agencies of education, be like, do you know that state assessments can look entirely different? Do you know that there's a layer that we can add to our state assessments that drives visualization and communication and ask kids to share their thinking, and that it's right there. Like, how fast can we get there? If we all kind of lean into, we can do better. The better is right there in front of us. That momentum, I think, will help us get there faster. The more of us that are sort of talking about this and defining this and expecting this, and collaborating to make that change, the faster we'll get there. And I think in the end, that's going to be much better for our students. And in the end, that's what education is all about.
I worry that this is too high level, to 37,000 feet, and a whole lot of people say, well, I have nothing I can do about it. It doesn't affect me. I want to remind everyone that there are really 4 distinct levels of assessment. There is the daily embedded lesson formative assessment. There are the unit assessments that you find in every chapter, in every unit, all throughout schooling. There are these high-stakes state assessments that have become just demanding powerhouses despite their limitations. And then there is the power of the national assessments, the SAT, the ACT, and the AP. So we've been talking about the state assessments, okay? And clearly we can recognize that it would help if the SAT and the ACT changed as well. But we forget that, look at the formative assessments. I'm in 100 classes on average a year. I see rarely a formative assessment at the end of a lesson. Now, let's see if we've learned this stuff in more than 10% of the classrooms. It just doesn't happen. It's not part of standard operating procedure. So we miss the opportunity to do the single most important form of assessment. Did today's lesson work? Do I have to reteach it? Do I have to group kids tomorrow? I mean, all of those things that we know. When John Hattie says that a formative assessment is the single most impactful in terms of the impact, obviously the single most impactful strategy is the formative assessment. And then there are the unit assessments. Unit assessments don't have to be straight out of the book. They don't have to be depth of knowledge 1. They can be depth of knowledge 1 and 2 and even 3. Every single teacher or course committee in elementary school, in middle school, grade committee can look at those assessments and stop and say, wait a second, we can make that better. I've worked with teachers in all kinds of districts with for example, the illustrative math assessments. I've watched the illustrative math assessment go from about a B- to somewhere closer to a B+, even an A-, depending upon the unit. But I mean, there's repetitiveness, there's wordiness. Those things can be changed. There are ways we can take those unit assessments and make a tremendous difference. So that just needs to be said in the midst of overhauling assessment. We own some of it. In terms of what we don't own, I think that the path forward is really a state-by-state effort. State legislators and state departments of education need to shift their policy. They need to hear from math teacher organizations. They need to hear from testing experts. They need to update practices. We need to work with superintendents and assistant superintendents and raise what's expected from assessment contractors. Schools and school districts, professional associations, teachers, administrators have to pressure the policymakers in these directions where they can show examples. You can use some unit assessments in some of the higher performing high schools and middle schools and elementary schools and show people some of what you're doing in the unit assessment and how out of step it is with the state assessment and how needed it is. And so when people say, well, how are you going to pull this off? I believe that to be very practical, that this begins with the Council of Chief State School Officers pulling together a task force of assessment and mathematics leaders to provide direction and recommendations and leadership And then within each state, there is a task force to look at how does one overhaul these assessments. We need to have the psychometricians and the state assessment people and the district test coordinators. We need to have the state math leaders, as well as the district math leaders and some high-powered teachers all come together and say, yes, this is an incredible opportunity. They need to look at the landscape, which we would be happy to, help them, do in ways. There are lots of people that understand these kinds of issues. And I think that's the starting place. Lots of other steps to do this. I love the idea of grants to empower states to do it. But I think that if we had 4 or 5, we right now have 6 states doing some amazing things with high school reform. Well, 6, 7, it's going to be 10 in another 2 years. And then it'll move up to 15 as people realize, oh my God, it's working. And, the superintendents move around, or the state commissioners, see what's going on, and they see what Maryland is doing and what Oregon is doing and what Idaho is doing. And I think it balloons from there. I think the same thing has to happen with assessment. And, we talk about 2030. I look back to calculators, and it was 18 years between the time that I bought those calculators in Connecticut and the last state allowed kids to use calculators on a middle school assessment. So, it doesn't happen quickly. I believe the rate of change is accelerating. I believe that this is an imperative that doesn't have the same kind of politics about it. My God, Steve Line was trying to destroy your kid's brain with these calculators. We are not quite at that point where we can actually show people what it looks like, and they'll say, yeah, my kid ought to be doing that kind of math. So I'm hopeful, I'm excited, and I can't thank the two of you enough for giving Jay and me this opportunity to share some thoughts and to just stir the pot on this, and hope that this becomes a movement in the right direction.
All right. Well, thank you both. And that concludes this great debate. You've given us and teachers, hopefully some teacher leaders and politicians out there at the state level, some good things to think about.
And now it's up to our listeners to take a moment, ponder these arguments, listen to this again, send it to your state representatives, and also consider what has resonated with you. Be sure to follow us on Blue Sky at Debate Math Pod to share your thoughts on this debate. How do you feel about this? What are you going to do about it?
And again, huge thanks to both of our guests for coming in with energy and excitement to really shake up the system and give us some good food for thought. Hold on. As we wrap up, Jay, where can listeners find you and learn more about you and your work?
Yeah. So Steve and I have created a website. It is called 21st Century Math Assessment .com. They can sort of see our research and our most recent writing. I'm also at exemplars.com, where we host a whole bunch of performance tasks. If people want to see the kinds of questions that Steve and I are talking about, our version of constructed response. So I have some free samples there people can look at. But that's probably the best 2 places. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm at Jay Meadows, and I post somewhat, not enough to sort of share my thinkings on education and assessment.
And Steve, where can listeners find you?
I'm at Steve L. Math, all lowercase, at AOL.com, proving that I turned 77 a week from tomorrow. It's all perfect. So that's where you reach me. I do lots of mentoring. I'm, the high school stuff. I sit with committees in different states, online, virtually, whatever. I'm off to Hawaii in March to sort of spread the word on some of these matters, and I still try and stir the pot.
Want to learn more about incorporating debate activities into your math classroom? Go to luzniak.com/podcast to sign up for my mailing list, learn more about debate math, and connect with resources you could use in your classroom today. That's luzniak.com/podcast.
Feel free to reach out to us with comments and questions on debatemath.com, or follow us on social media at debatemath or at debatemathpod on Twitter.
And don't forget that you can text us with your thoughts on any of the debates too.
You can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts,
or wherever you listen to this podcast. Your feedback is super important to us. Well, that's all from us.
Looking forward to debating with you next episode. Until next time, cheers.